Hey everybody, my name is Brian Anderson. I'm a solutions architect at Eagle Technologies. I see a lot of familiar names and thus faces in the attendees window. So hey everybody. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? I guess Gail, one order of business. We were going to launch a couple of Q&A or poll questions just to try to take the temperature of the folks on this call.
Yes, we were. Do you want me to launch those?
Here we go. I am doing it as we speak if I can figure it out. There we go. All right, so while I'm talking, if you wouldn't mind answering just those two simple questions, I'm going to cheat and answer them as well just to game the numbers. There we go. All right, so I'm watching the polling come in as we speak. Pardon the awkward silence. So that first question, have you ever felt misled by a vendor who avoids technical details? We're getting a pretty resounding yes here. 88%, it's changing in real time, have voted yes on that. So, okay, well, good. I think you guys are going to like the content for today then. So as the title suggests, we're going to talk about outcomes versus architecture. And admittedly, that's not the best title that I've ever come up with. If you stick with me through on the next couple of slides, though, I think you'll find the content intriguing. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the agenda. So first and foremost, this isn't a product pitch. It still feels weird to say that, right? Because Eagle is a VAR or an integrator, but it doesn't matter if you're a VAR or a vendor. We keep the lights on by selling stuff. Really, the inspiration for today was kind of an anti-sales presentation. And what I mean by that is what we've noticed over the last 5 to 8 years is that vendors have really changed the way that they talk to customers. They've changed the way that they sell their product. And they've moved to something called outcomes-based marketing, which we're going to get into today. We're going to go over an example, talk about the definition, and then give you some examples. So if you're like me, you can get some concrete ideas of what we're talking about. We'll compare and contrast that to architecture and talk about why that's important. And then we're going to give you some nice examples. Specifically, we're going to talk about hyper-converged infrastructure, public cloud, and modern backups. And what we'll talk about is we'll talk about the kind of outcomes that companies sell those products on, how they sell products to you, and then we'll give you a list of challenges. You could almost think of it as a cheat sheet, things that you would want to bring up in those meetings when you're talking to those vendors. And then we'll close out with some takeaways, and if you folks are still paying attention, I'll spend a couple of slides on who Eagle Technologies is. So a couple of setup slides. The modern data center, conceptually, this is kind of what it looks like in my opinion. You've got all of these widgets, right? They can be hardware, software. It doesn't matter what they are, and they're all individually pretty palatable. But once they start to intertwine, right, and operate with each other, that's where things get confusing. It becomes hard to troubleshoot. You can start to take on technical debt, things you can't get rid of because of their dependencies on other things, right? And of course, there's a lot more strands than just the 5 that we've got up here as an example. So at Eagle, we've seen this really get worse over the last 5 to 8 years. Things have become more complex. Now you've got cloud infrastructure, software as a service, platform as a service. You have to think about hybrid cloud methodologies. So what we've seen is kind of this natural knee jerk where a lot of folks, especially when you get up to C-level, they want to know, why on earth do I have so many vendors? Why can't I get to consumer grade simplicity, right? Those things upgrade relatively easy. I don't have as many vendors. They're easier to take care of. And so what we've noticed is vendors have heard this, right? And they've moved to something called outcomes-based marketing. So outcomes-based marketing, in its simplest sense, is selling a concept or an idea, right? It's focusing on your pain points and what are the outcomes that you would seek to get out of a product. Now, one of the themes in today's presentation, and we're going to move through examples to kind of talk through some of this and get this to solidify in your head. But one of our themes is that there's nothing wrong with outcomes-based marketing as long as you understand the devil's still in the details. And I think on this slide, you can drive that home by looking at definition 2 of outcome. It's a conclusion reached through a process of logical thinking, right? Well, what vendors like to do is they want to give you the conclusion, and they're hoping that you avoid the logical thinking because that creates due diligence, that creates competition, that creates product bake-offs. You get the idea. So to give you an example of outcomes-based marketing, This is an email that showed up in my inbox about a year ago. And it was such a great example of outcomes-based marketing that I just copy and pasted it. So here in a second, I'll see if any of you want to go into the chat window and give me an idea what you think this is. But essentially, this product is going to give you the freedom to choose any hardware, any hypervisor. It's going to allow you to grow to any scale. It's going to give you that consumer-grade simplicity that we talked about, one-click deployment, provisioning. We're going to allow you to use just the resources you need, right? So you're not going to have any bloated infrastructure that you buy way in advance. We're going to get rid of technology lock-in. We're going to have application mobility, native data protection, and disaster recovery. So that sounds fantastic. I want all of that, right? What you'll notice is they didn't talk about any architecture whatsoever. You don't know if this is a lemon or if this is a fantastic product. They just spoke to your pain points and told you what the outcomes were going to be. So if anyone wants to venture a guess in the chat window what kind of product this is, or that nail the product, we'll see. I got a couple coming in. So someone asked if it's backup software. That's close. Got a couple more. Okay, so someone just nailed it. It's actually hyper-converged infrastructure. And more specifically, this product here is Nutanix. It's not even a product that Eagle sells, but I've always respected how effective their marketing is. So thanks for throwing in some chat guesses there, by the way. So I don't want to get too far off the rails, but something that vendors like to marry with outcomes-based marketing is outcomes-based selling. And if this interests you, A, you're a nerd like me, but B, you can Google it and read more about it. But essentially, they marry outcomes-based marketing. That allows them to bundle products and services. They want to get away from one-time transactions and move into a subscription-based revenue. That, of course, to them creates reoccurring revenue. And these aren't my words. These are words you can get online when people brag about the positive benefits of outcomes-based selling. It's about monetizing the entire ecosystem and eliminating future competition. So the only reason I brought this up today, we're not going to really talk about outcomes-based selling, is that it's always important to understand what motivates vendors. And I think you guys know that, but sometimes it's nice to see what is motivating them when maybe they want you to get into a recurring revenue relationship, or they want to focus on outcomes and get you to bundle solutions together. So hopefully we can have a little fun on the next couple of slides. So one thing that we see make outcomes-based marketing worse is what we call buzzword bingo. And what I mean by that is vendors have learned that if they don't toss in certain buzzwords in their product segment, then they may not even get past like you reading the first email right in their inbox or past the first phone call. You may not attend their webinar. And in my humble opinion, buzzwords are so overused that they've become nearly meaningless, right? So, you know, just to give you a couple of examples, if you store zeros and ones nowadays, you brag about having deduplication, but that can mean so many things. Is it single instance storage? Is it global or just per volume? What is the block size, right? How effective is it? Is there a limit on how much metadata you can track, right? Can I have 200 terabytes of data but only dedupe 100 terabytes of it? What is the performance overhead? Is it going to double my latencies? And what's interesting from an Eagle perspective, I meet a lot of vendors that are so used to doing outcomes-based marketing and not getting pulled into the weeds, they can't answer these questions without follow-up. Another good example would be encryption. Encryption's become such a hot topic that it's become another one of those buzzword checkboxes. Everybody says they have encryption. But there's so many devil in the details components of this. Are they using self-encrypting drives? In my opinion, that's kind of cheating, right? Does it need an external key management server? That can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And I've seen lots of customers not realize that until pretty late through the due diligence that they have this added cost. Is it in flight or at rest, right? Does it traverse during replication? Is it FIPS 140-2 certified or just compliant? There's a big difference there. So of course, once again, my point is these words intermingled with outcomes-based marketing, they can create a situation where you don't even know what product you're looking at. You just like the way they speak about it. And we're actually going to give you some examples of that here in a second. I always put my email address at the end of my presentations if you'd like a copy. One of the reasons you might want a copy today is it would be fun to print this out and then play this game while you're watching your next webinar, right? See how many of these you can circle. See if you can get 4 in a row. I've only given this presentation one other time, and I did it before another vendor, and the vendor came up to me afterwards, and he's like, man, I really wish I would have gone first. He's like, I didn't realize on my slides that they were all buzzword bingo slides. So let's drive this home. I did this as an exercise to see if I was full of it or not. I went to 5 websites I went to their first page or their about page, and I pulled 1 or 2 sentences off. And I wanted to see if I could even tell what the product was once I got it off of the product website. So I'm going to go through 5 of them, and then we're going to let you guys guess. Gail, our marketing director, is going to keep track, and we're going to bribe you guys with cash. So whoever gets the first guess, and that could mean product segment, like is it backup, is it HCI, or nails the product, Gail's going to send you a $10 gift card on Amazon.
Yep, so just chat that in the window, in the chat window.
All right, so number 1. This product is designed to run on-prem or on the cloud. The stack is anchored by APIs, deep app awareness, and a cloud-scale file system designed to be masterless and self-healing. Holy cow, that sounded awesome the first time I read that. I got to be honest. I want that. So number 2, delivers cloud economics and operational efficiency with automation, predictive analytics, and a comprehensive set of cost models. I probably want one more, but that one still sounds pretty good. Built with end-to-end NVMe, real-time machine learning, and up to 10 million IOPS. That sounds pretty good. Provides a unified hybrid cloud platform for running critical high-performance workloads on-prem with integrated cloud data mobility and protection. I almost had to stop and breathe on that one. And then number 5, industry-leading machine learning analytics platform with one-click deployment, provisioning, scaling, predictive analytics, and cloud-like agility. Well, they really hit buzzword bingo on that one. All right, so number 1. Does anyone want to guess what number 1 is? I got a couple guesses in. People are guessing if it's Nimble Storage. Nope. Is it HCI? Nope. Boom, someone hit it. It's backup. Right, so this particular product is Rubrik. It's not even a product that Eagle sells, but man, talk about a really great sentence, right? A really great example of buzzword bingo. So number 2, any guesses on what number 2 is? Nope, it's not Nutanix, it's not Commvault, it's not business intelligence. That's a good guess. There, someone hit it. It's cloud. So I think it's kind of funny that AWS has to tell you they deliver cloud economics. That seems kind of obvious, but once again, they even know what kind of buzzwords they have to hit. All right, number 3 is at least a little bit easier in the sense that someone should know what kind of product segment this is because they mentioned IOPS. So we'll see who says it first. Oh, lots of people are saying Nimble. Ooh, someone nailed it. Wow, that was impressive. They even said the product. That's PowerMax. So the reason I showed this one is this is a good example of a product segment actually co-opting a new buzzword. So this is when I first noticed machine learning started to get mentioned in storage. And of course, as a nerd, it kind of makes me scrunch my face up a little bit because I'm like, what in the heck does that mean, right? Is that a caching algorithm? Those have been around forever. Is that QoS? Those have been around forever. And it may even mean something else. I honestly don't know what that means. But it's a great example of buzzwords showing up in a product segment. So number 4, any guesses here? So we're getting VM. Well, someone hit it. Will Eccles, good job. That's Datrium. I'm a bit of a Datrium fanboy, so I had to include Datrium in here. But you can see how they do a great example there as well, buzzword bingo. And then finally, the last one. Someone just said I quit. Sorry, that was funny. Number 5, industry-leading machine learning analytics platform. Anyone want to guess? I tell you what, I'm going to give that to Jim, who said I quit, because I totally made that one up. The company is BS, as you can see. I wanted to see how easy it was to do this. And as you can tell, I think I tried a little too hard, but I think I still did okay. So once again, Jim, I'm going to give that to you just because you felt defeated. Thanks for everyone guessing, man. The screen was scrolling. That was fun. So I think the point you can see here is that people have gotten so good at this that you can't even tell what the products are sometimes. They hit so many buzzwords that it sounds alluring. I think I want to buy that, but you don't know what it is. I think the thing I would add is that oftentimes when I hear about some new company coming out of stealth and I go to their webpage, I can't immediately figure out what they do, right? I have to keep looking around and searching. So kind of the point is for the next half is that once again, everybody wants consumer grade simplicity, but the devil's still in the details, right? You still have all these considerations that you have to make. So let's actually give some examples of that. As I mentioned, I'm going to move through hyper-converged infrastructure, public cloud, and modern backups. So let's do HCI first. So unless you're living under a rock, you've probably had a vendor come at you with HCI. Most of the vendors that we represent, I mean, they are hell-bent on leading with HCI, and there's still a lot of other viable alternatives. A ton of people guessed Nimble on that last slide. Nimble's a great product. It's block storage. But HCI is a software-centric architecture, and I think the most notable thing is it gets rid of traditional storage, right? It moves the storage up into the compute node and has a lot of software magic to make that happen. So HCI vendors are very good at outcomes-based marketing. So they'll come in and they'll say, hey, we're going to give you a distributed architecture. We're going to limit the amount of vendors in your environment. You're going to be up and running faster. We're going to give you more visibility and troubleshooting because we own the whole environment. We're going to give you lifecycle assurance. That means one-click updates, right? So you don't have to worry if this firmware works with this piece of software anymore. We're going to validate all of that for you. We're going to do that with orchestrated one-click updates. Stole my own thunder. We're going to offload technical expertise. That doesn't mean we're going to get rid of people, but we're going to allow you to focus on other stuff. And then something that we've been seeing for over 5 years is what's called the build versus buy mentality. And this is a very effective talk track when you talk to CIOs. And I have to admit, there's times when I believe this about certain products, and I've used it myself. It's the notion that you can go out there and you can buy all these individual components. You can spend all your time on integration. You can spend all of your time on keeping the lights on. Or we can come in and we can sell you on an outcome. We can show you a product that gives you everything you want, that's tightly integrated, that you can have up and running in a day, right? That's the buying an outcome. And I think the first time I saw that was with VCE. And I've seen a lot of HCI vendors and a lot of vendors in general adopt that methodology or that way of talking. So as I said, the devil is in the details, right? So I have an entire presentation I've been given for, gosh, almost 2 years about HCI. And this is just one slide out of it. I could burn 45 minutes on this slide. I'll move pretty fast. More than happy to talk offline later or answer questions during the Q&A if you want to get into some weeds here. So vendor lock-in. So when you buy a product from a single vendor, right, and this is, let's say in HCI, it's opposed to buying three-tier architecture, you know, block storage, network compute, you're getting rid of your competition, right? So I've seen this time and time again with vendors. They give you a smoking deal on that first 5-node cluster, but node 6 is 40, 50% more than the original nodes. You haven't entered into a knife fight at that point. They know they have you. They know you're not going to go buy another 5 or 6 node cluster because it costs too much. And so you're eliminating competition when you upgrade or when you grow. As it relates to two integrated, this is the old, if you're old enough to remember this, the DVD, VCR, TV combo analogy. Sometimes it's not great to have too much integration. Now it depends on the product, but typically what we see is that storage grows faster than compute. So once again, depending on the HCI architecture, that can become a painful notion, right? Maybe you buy node 6 and it has twice as much storage as node 7. Or the vendor pushes back and he wants all the nodes to be similar size, so you buy 2 more nodes, even though you really just need 1 node because you don't have a lot of compute needs. Well, all of a sudden you have more VMware licensing, you have more backup licensing, right? You get into weird N+1 availability issues. If I take down node 6, I lose 20% of my storage and 40% of my compute or 40% of my performance. This is all stuff you got to track in your head that you're not used to tracking, right? And I see a lot of HCI customers knee-jerk back into upgrading at night and on the weekends because of the fact that they're losing performance and capacity. And if they've grown in this way, in a way that's even hard to understand. As it relates to TCO, anyone that owned EqualLogic, back when I had a real job, we owned a ton of them at my organization. They were really fantastic, and I think they're still the top-selling SAN of all time. But when you bought the second or third one, you started to realize that I'm buying an $80,000 or $100,000 scale-out appliance to get more storage, but maybe I don't need the performance, right? In a scale-deep architecture, that might have cost 20 grand. So any appliance model really fits that bill, right? You're going to see higher TCO overall. When you have storage in the node, you'll notice a lot of bullets talk about this on this slide. You get this interdependence between nodes that you may not have dealt with before, so you can have hot spotting issues, right? Maybe node A gets lit up with writes and it's building parity across nodes B, C, and D, and you're seeing performance issues over there. Depending on the HCI architecture, they either brag about having great data locality or they brag about being distributed, right? What is the penalty or the cost of those different architectures? What happens if I have a big SQL database? right? Mixed workloads are frowned upon. So if I have a massive SQL reindexing job that happens, that might be another cluster. VDI should be another cluster, right? Data warehousing might be another cluster. This all adds to your TCO. I've had some larger customers struggle with troubleshooting because of all of this, the interdependence between nodes. Most HCI vendors I work with nowadays, they want all flash nodes. There's a couple of reasons to that. I think the biggest reason is when you look at old traditional architectures, you might have 60 spindles contributing to your I/O. When you move to a hybrid HCI architecture, maybe you've got 4 spindles per node. So if you've got good data locality, all of a sudden you just have 300 IOPS when you hit those spinners, right? So the problem with an all-flash workload is it's expensive. So if you don't have a big budget or you've got a lot of secondary workloads, like a law firm or a campus, school, you may find HCI to be fairly expensive. In large environments, they'll try to pair it with network-attached storage, which can get expensive. Lifecycle assurance, some people don't like waiting for features. It can take 9 months for everything to get QA'd, right? Beating a dead horse here with storage inside the node, but once again, when a node goes down, storage goes down as well, and there's a consequence. I still haven't seen a great encryption story in what I would call Gen 1 HCI. Most of them still, as I joked earlier, cheated by leveraging self-encrypting disks, or at a bare minimum, they need an external KMS, or there's a performance penalty to having encryption on, right? These are problems that you may not see in some really nice block storage arrays, for instance. And then finally, this is a topic in and of itself, but what we're seeing with NVMe and storage class memory is that the latencies of storage memory are approaching the latencies of working memory, like processor cache. And it's actually flipped the paradigm upside down to where the network is the slowest component. So my point is that if you want to embrace storage class memory, there's a lot of HCI architectures out there that won't allow you to see those benefits, right? Because there's too much reliance on the network. And we're seeing them try to answer that with NVMe over fabrics and some expensive network topologies that once again may add to your TCO. So I think you see the point. In terms of public cloud, it's really hard to get through a conversation with a customer without cloud coming into play. If you open up and issue a CIO magazine, every page has the word cloud on it, right? You guys are all familiar with public cloud. Here's the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, short form definition. But before we get into the way that these vendors talk to you about cloud, one thing I wanted to go over was the service models in cloud computing. So the way you can remember service models is who interacts with them. So as it relates to infrastructure as a service, that's what sysadmins interact with, right? So typically, that would be running VMs out in the public cloud. We might call that lift and shift if you grab some stuff in your on-prem data center and move it up. Developers, they interact with platform as a service. That has really evolved over time. It's always been called kind of operating system down, but nowadays we see serverless computing, which I think will overtake container-based computing. Not really serverless, but you don't have to manage the servers. That's an exploding part of public cloud right now, and actually a good use case if you've got developers that can develop new code. And then finally, all of us here, end users, we probably all logged into online email or Facebook or LinkedIn today. But this is kind of relevant as we move through some of these slides, so I thought I'd bring it up. So if you've ever sat in a meeting when Azure reps or AWS reps come out and talk to your CIO, this is the kind of stuff they talk about. They say, look, we're going to give you faster deployments. You're not going to have to wait 9 months to get something into budget and then 6 more months to deploy it. We're going to get rid of your facilities and infrastructure because we know you hate worrying about fuel contracts for your generators or worrying that you don't have a generator, right? We're going to move to operational expense, which means you can pay as you grow. That also means that there's no more overbuying, right? So you don't have to buy that $250,000 SAN that's only going to be half full for the first 2 years. We're going to give you elasticity so you can expand as you need to, maybe during the holidays, maybe during tax season. We're going to give you better access and mobility, and then we're going to give you measured and metered services so you can see what you're consuming and what your individual apps cost. So this is very alluring, especially if you haven't been managing your data center very well, or it's become very costly, or if you're just mired in all this complexity and troubleshooting. So just like HCI, there's things you have to contend with. Vendor lock-in is a biggie. Not so much on infrastructure as a service, but if you're looking at platform or you're looking at software as a service, those are proprietary code bases. They usually aren't open source, they aren't shared. And if you go all in on one of those products and you decided that you did bad due diligence or things have changed or you made a mistake or it just kind of sucks, I've seen customers have a great deal of pain getting out of those solutions. A lot of these solutions are built for the masses, so they have less flexibility. I see a lot of people focusing on data governance, trying to understand what's in their data, and then having limited access to some of it when it reaches out into the cloud. I've seen lawyers get spun up on location and ownership and compliance. When you stretch your network into someone else's network, you increase your attack service. I just read a scary article 2 days ago about how hackers are having more and more success getting into managed service providers and public cloud instances. User education is a big one. If you've got someone that does SQL development, you have to explain to them there's now a consequence if they want to run a query 5 times in a row just to see if it's faster, right? Maybe that query takes 10 hours to run and you just chewed up $600 in costs, right? Zombie VMs, they need to be shut down, right? Typically, you have that glut of extra capacity and you don't worry about that stuff. There's still a lot of architectures, especially in infrastructure as a service, that don't have the ability to move you out of a node, right? So you have to literally shut stuff down and power it back up just so it comes up in another node. That can be very painful. One thing that we talk a lot about at Eagle is data integrity versus availability. We see a lot of cloud providers talk about 6 nines of data integrity, but what they don't mention is they only have 3 nines of availability, right? So they may guarantee that they're not going to corrupt your data, but they're also showing in their SLA that they can be down almost 9 hours a year, and you have no recourse, right? Backups in the cloud are still more difficult. We'll talk about that in a second too. We still see extreme outages. We still see region failures. We still see folks that want to consume cloud but aren't into operational expense. They're a cash company and they want to do CapEx. Bandwidth cost and throughput are a biggie. I see a lot of folks that buy a 1 gig pipe and then they wonder why they can't fill it up, and that's because they have latency issues, right? We see folks that want to do reverse DR or DR to the cloud and then run into issues with how fast they can move data back and forth, right? It blows out their recovery objectives. Service level agreements, those don't typically favor the consumer or the customer. They're quite literally limited liability agreements. If the cloud provider screws up and loses your data or is offline for a significant amount of time, we're going to give you 2 or 3 months of what you paid us back, and that's it. Long-term contracts. We see a lot of these providers state that the only way you're going to get the best pricing is if you buy into a 1 to even 10-year contract. They operate actually like insurance companies do, right? Where they take your money before they have to pay out. I've even seen some of them sell 25-year bonds, right? Just to bring their costs down because they realize it's a land grab right now. You can go to Reddit and read really funny stories about cost overruns. And of course, all of this is maturing really fast. So I think sometimes there's paralysis just because people know if they make a decision this year, it may have been a different decision next year. So once again, that was a whole lot of bullets and a whole lot of talking, but I think you get the idea. There's quite a bit you need to consider when you look at any of those service models in public cloud. So our last one, data protection and DR. Everybody here knows what backups are. I would imagine that most of you would agree that you hate backups too, right? Harsh term, but the point is that nobody likes waking up every morning and looking at their backup report, right? Or trying to figure out why a file was locked, or worrying that they haven't tried to do a test restore in 3 months, right? And so we've seen a lot of new backup products come out, and they once again, they sell you on distributed architectures. They're going to limit the amount of vendors that you have to maintain and worry about. You're going to be up and running faster. You're going to be able to upgrade faster. You're going to have lifecycle assurance. We're going to offload some of that technical expertise. You don't need a backup guy anymore, right? And they talk about that build versus buy mentality. One thing that's interesting is all of these outcomes are the same outcomes that you saw in hyper-converged infrastructure. And the only reason I point that out is it's a really great example of how easy it is to sell almost any product just by speaking to general pains that you see in the data center and in your budgets, right? So in terms of backup challenges, one thing that we see a lot is that when these new products come out and they have fantastic marketing, really slick interfaces, they're still younger products, right? So they have less flexibility. And that oftentimes creates solution sprawl. This is something I saw in my own data centers. Before I knew it, I think I owned 4 backup products because 3 of them were point products that solved specific things or problems that I needed to solve. So, you know, one size doesn't always fit all, especially with younger companies. These companies follow the HCI model generally. So they are appliances, which means they have a shorter product life. I've seen a lot of vendors in many different ways try to get you to replace them every 3 years. That creates higher TCO, of course. Many of them don't have the same kind of granularity that you might be used to, right? For clustered SQL or Oracle or MySQL, you know, insert your name here. I see a lot of vendors tout instant recovery. It's the notion that you can bring VMs online on your backup storage. Well, the problem with that is they don't size backup storage to bring all of your VMs up online. It would be prohibitively expensive. So it may work with 1 or 2 VMs, but it's not really good disaster recovery, right? It's not a great option if you lose 50% of your VMs or all of your VMs. This is more of just a consideration. A lot of folks out there have extended retention, so you get into pretty long-term commitments with your backup product. And if you pick one and it doesn't work well for you, you may end up having it shut down in the corner of your data center for the next 2 years, waiting for that extended retention to go away. So as it relates to features by acquisition, does anyone here, have they ever heard of Kroll on track? I wish I was looking at you right now so I could see a show of hands. Typically when I ask folks if they've heard of Kroll on track, nobody raises their hands. But the interesting thing is maybe a third of the folks in the room probably own Kroll on track and don't even know it. And what I mean by that is Kroll on track is an application that allows you to do granular restores on a bunch of different applications and data sets. So what we see is we see a lot of vendors not wanting to develop all of that themselves because it takes quite a bit of time. And so they bundle Kroll on track into their product and they don't even really explain it that way to you, right? So that means they don't have a single code base. That means that feature is OEM'd. So even if you don't see it, there's finger pointing, there's a lack of comfort between the different support organizations. There's a whole other conversation we can have about integration versus innovation. Innovation takes longer, but typically we see better products when everything's developed in-house as opposed to buying a bunch of products and spending all your time on integration. So you always have to worry about products that grow features by acquisition. The next 2 bullets, what about software as a service backups? More and more people are adopting software as a service and then starting to realize that those companies don't have really great granular restore capabilities. So you need a product that's mature enough to be able to pull those applications back in-house or maybe put them in another region or zone in a public cloud provider. And really the same thing for cloud backups. Even if you're just talking about lift and shift operations, you got to be able to make sure you can back some of that up. I would say about 7 years ago, we saw people moving to cloud infrastructure and they were just divorcing backups. They just assumed the cloud providers took care of it for them. And then more and more folks are getting familiar with those tightened SLAs or have actually gone through some sort of situation and they're realizing they still have a responsibility to back that data up. And then finally, these other 2 bullets are separated because they're really kind of a different topic. One thing that we've seen in hyper-converged infrastructure and some of the more modern block storage is that they can hold millions of snaps, right? They have granular restore capabilities. Some of them even use Kroll on track to do that. And so they'll come into your data center, into your office, and they'll say, look, you can take that money you're spending on backups and you can give that to us and backups are dead. We're gonna divorce backups. And so the problem with that is something called a technology gap is lost. And then you're not following something called the 3-2-1. And I actually have a couple of slides, so we'll jump over to the next slide on that. So many of you may have seen this before. I've also seen vendors create something goofy called the 4-3-2-1-0. But this is a great way to explain to your upper management what responsible data protection is. So you need 3 copies of your data. You need a technology gap, so you need 2 types of hardware and software. That's to ensure that you don't have software corrupt your data or malform your data. Sometime I can tell you a story offline of how I would have lost quite a bit of data if I didn't have a traditional backup product because of that technology gap. And then finally, geography. You need to keep one of your data offsite. I always joke at least wider than an F5 here in the Midwest, but hopefully in different FEMA zones. So what does that look like if you're a visual person like me? Well, this is the old tried and true method, right? 2 traditional storage arrays and then a traditional backup product. You're probably going to have array-based replication, but it doesn't have to be. It can be software-based replication. And then you're pulling a copy of change data down, right? So this is a very popular model. And you can see we've got 3 copies of your data. We've got 2 different technologies, and we've got 1 offsite. More and more, we're seeing folks realize that DR is very expensive. they don't really have the budget for it, and that based on a number of different methodologies, maybe they can have acceptable recovery objectives if they move to other models. So one example of that is we see people taking a traditional backup product and writing it out to a public cloud instance or out to a managed service provider. And this is something Eagle does for customers. And once again, it can work really well if we do the right due diligence. More and more, we're seeing folks do this. We're seeing hyper-converged infrastructure have the ability to build software as a service instances of their appliance out in the public cloud to be able to ingest the data to support encryption and global deduplication, right? And then more and more, we're also seeing the ability to take those workloads and bring them online in instances of, let's give you an example, bare bones VMware on AWS. So this is something that's evolving real fast, but all three of those examples you can see keep your data in three places, they keep a technology gap, and you keep one off site. The thing you can't get rid of, even though your HCI vendor may tell you, is that traditional backup product, because once again, you may lose data. Unfortunately, I just heard of someone about 6 months ago that had a freak triple power outage. So basically their HCI came up twice, and while it was coming up, it was powered down again. They ended up having corrupted data, and they had bought into the notion they didn't need traditional backup, and they lost data, unfortunately. So we're getting towards the end here. So let's move through some takeaways. So one of the things that Eagle's talked about before in some presentations, is if you get high enough in your organization, right, you get to your C-levels or your management, somebody there just sees all of this IT stuff as plumbing, right? They gloss over in meetings when you talk about lights out management or keeping the lights on. And they just want to spend less money, avoid surprises in the budget. They want to mitigate risk. They want to embrace digital transformation, right, and be more agile. And they want to make money and grow the business. So you can see why outcomes-based marketing is so effective, right? And you can see why a lot of vendors would prefer not to talk to the sysadmins, because it's easier for them to come in and speak at this level, speak to pain points, and just promise that they're going to solve problems. But I think you guys can see where I'm going here. Obviously, there's a responsibility still to do some of that due diligence. You know, so in summary, IT is going to continue to be complex. I think that's great job security for everybody on the phone. But you do have to be wary of outcomes-based selling. It's important to understand the outcomes of a product and to be blunt, to be able to speak to your C-levels in that way. But you have to remember that buzzwords can be misleading. Outcomes-based selling, you can represent a lot of different products. I mean, you can represent a fantastic code base or a complete lemon with the exact same presentation when you get at this high of a level. So to guard yourself against that, really the best thing you can do is just educate yourself on all these architectural components and understand the devil's in the details. I understand how that can be a bit daunting though, right? Because you guys are wearing a lot of hats. And so that's where you have another option, right? You can work with a value-added reseller or an integrator. I said at the beginning of this that I wasn't going to sell you anything, and it was kind of a lie. The one thing I would like to do is spend a couple of slides kind of talking about Eagle and explaining how we can kind of add value throughout all of this. So I see quite a few people that have worked with Eagle in the past. We've been around a long time. We've been evolving for 37 years. We have the same owners and founders that we did when the company started. They still work here today. I like to make them feel really old by explaining that the company's been around longer than cell phones and GPS, Nintendo Entertainment Centers, right? You can read the rest there, the internet. I always joke that our main goal is to outlast Java, and that we're going to shutter the company when that happens. You can see our logos down there as they've changed. But really, we're data center specialists. So we focus on the data center. So servers, networking, storage, compute, even if that's all compressed into HCI. Big portion of our business is backups and business continuity and DR. More and more folks want to know about what's in their data or how they can govern it or how they can get copies of it pulled back in line from the edge. And then, of course, as an integrator, a value-added reseller, if you can't speak to cloud, help folks decide when they need to move to the cloud or help them back up the cloud, you're quickly going to become a dinosaur. One thing that customers sometimes are surprised to hear is that we get hounded by vendors more than they do. And the reason that is they would love to sell you a product, but if they can get us to believe in a product, to get all of our guys trained, to get our installers trained, and to go out there and talk to customers about it, well, they just created a bigger sales force, right? We actually love doing that. If a vendor approaches us, the first thing we want to do is get a hand on their product, because what we found is lots of times it's just marketing, but every once in a while we find a product that we think is special and it may even be better than something that we already represent to customers. And so we'll go through that painful divorce. We'll go deep on the new core product, and then we'll represent what we think is a best of breed product. We're also still heavily engineering focused. I think we're over 3/4 nerds, pre and post sales, install, and support. I always like to joke that there's not a whole lot of eye contact going on at the Eagle Christmas party. But at the end of the day, we already touched on this analogy. Your bosses care about outcomes. You guys probably care about engineering. And what we like to think we do at Eagle is we kind of help you bridge those gaps, right? So we can help you do all the due diligence and make sure that a particular product's going to work well for you. We can also help you understand how to advocate that to your upper management.